Welcome everybody. So in this section, indeed, we will present how to define your step-by-step approach for your API journey. Matthias Scheerder and myself, Thomas Delacourt, we are integration architects at Archers, and we are currently busy with a number of API management initiatives or journeys at different customers. So the step-by-step approach that we will present is of course based on our insights and our experience in those initiatives. And often API initiatives start when a CIO say, look guys, let's start with an API management track, because he has heard it from his other CIOs or leaders, or he feel the pressure of the Gartner reports. And then directly the architect says, okay, look, let's select and buy the best API management platform. So let's write a big number of papers to explain all our requirements and follow an RFP process and start the API management platform selection. Or more on design and development, people are directly starting by creating API design guidelines based on Google or Zalando, or just creating them by themselves. But that's not enough. If you want to have a successful API initiative or journey, you have to do more. And in this presentation, we will explain in a number of steps what you need to do. And as for all IT initiatives, you have to start with a strategy. So Matthias will explain that more in detail.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Thomas. So as a first step, you need to define your API strategy. Having an API strategy is essential because it will help you set the right focus for your API journey. You will compose your program and make your decisions by reflecting on your API strategy. But what exactly is an API strategy and what does it contain? Basically, an API strategy answers some basic questions. What strategic objectives do you want to accomplish with APIs? What is important for your organization that APIs will help realize? And also, what is the added value APIs will bring in your organization? You are not just doing APIs because they are fancy, or at least you shouldn't be doing that. So once you have defined strategic objectives, you will have an easier time putting your API journey together. They will not only help you to define the journey, but they will also help you convince your organization to adopt the API architecture. And lastly, they will also provide a measure to quantify and qualify whether your API initiative is a success. So, how do you answer the aforementioned questions? This will differ from organization to organization, but we have some advice to get you started. Think about the triggers that got you thinking about APIs. You can think about both internal as well as external objectives. Your organization might or might not have both, but try to list them and see where APIs come in. Read around on the market, get informed, and see where you can find value for your organization. An important advice is to engage stakeholders. Your stakeholders will have their opinion, they will have requirements to be fulfilled, and generally they will have very valuable input. So pick their brains, capture those requirements, and use them for your API strategy. Specify the added value APIs will bring into your architecture and your IT landscape. And communicate your strategy. The more you communicate it towards more people, the more feedback you will get on one hand, which can help you adapt and strengthen it, but also the more your organization will embrace it. In case you want to know more or get inspired, we have a webinar on the API economy that you can watch. So each organization will have their reasons and thus their own drivers to start an API initiative. One organization might want to engage in more flexible and meaningful ways with partners. Another organization might want to expose as much data as they can in order to partake in an open data initiative. Yet another organization might want to expose their valuable data and monetize this using APIs. At Archers, we have encountered a number of frequently returning drivers. They are listed here, and they can serve to inspire you and your organization to reflect on what is important. Once you have your API strategy defined, it is time for the next step, starting your API program. But how do you do this? Starting with API management is more than selecting a tool and writing guidelines. It's not just a technical initiative. It actually entails a number of aspects that all need to be taken into account in order to make your API journey a success. We've already covered the strategy. The other aspects will be influenced, often to a great extent, by this strategy. You will need to govern and manage the APIs throughout their lifecycle. This also means having them documented in a good manner, and all of this without being a bottleneck towards delivery. You will need to have a platform in place. This doesn't necessarily mean having a dedicated API gateway, but your APIs will run somewhere and the right provisions and decisions will need to be taken. You will need to think and possibly make changes to the organization. API management often means introducing some new roles, and which roles that will be, again, depend on the organization and the goals that need to be accomplished. You will need to think about how to design and realize APIs. Often organizations introduce an API reference architecture, or they amend their existing reference architecture with API-specific extensions. Also very important are standards and guidelines. As an organization, you want to have consistent APIs that have the same look and feel, which means they work in a way expected by your consumers. Having standards and guidelines will help your architects, designers, developers, and testers to work in the same way across teams, tribes, or however your organization is arranged. And lastly, communication is important. You will need to train and coach architects, analysts, and developers. You will need to spread awareness of the initiative. You will need to keep stakeholders in the loop, and these things all need to be taken up in the program as well. So at Archers, we have created a standard framework to construct an API program. We call these the 6 pillars of the API program. Depending on the organization and the demand at hand, we will use this framework to assess what needs to be done and what is already in place. Moving to the next slide, we have created a base framework for API governance. This shows the base flow in order to guide APIs through their lifecycle, which roles are implicated, what deliverables have to be created for which checkpoint. Note that we call this the base or the standard framework for a reason. It is fine-tuned depending on the organization and its needs. Some organizations might have an issue with the contract quality, and so they might start with just a contract checkpoint and add other checkpoints when the need arises. Others might start with the full framework and relax it when the initiative is going well. It's a modular and flexible framework. We can also help you take a quick start with standards and guidelines. We have base standards ready on different topics regarding API design. For example, how to version your APIs, which HTTP status codes you will be using, or how to implement filtering and sorting in your APIs. We also have base standards for security topics, for example, how to implement authentication and authorization, how to keep your information safe, and what to handle in the different layers of the security architecture. It is important to highlight again that your API program will be driven by your API strategy. The API strategy will define the scope of the initiative, and through setting the objectives, it will also determine the level of ambition for your initiative. In that sense, you will see that an API program for exposing external APIs will be totally different than one for only exposing internal APIs. So now we know what aspects come into play for constructing an API program. It's time to get a feel for what your current state is. Thomas can tell you all about this.
Yeah, that's right, Matthias. So in the next state, in your next step, you will assess your current state. So as Matthias already has explained, we have our 6 pillars. So you have to assess your current state on the level of those 6 pillars. Because why do you have to do that assessment? Yeah, your API initiative is most likely not starting from a blank page. It is possible that projects or parts of your organization have started to create your APIs, or you have already in SOA or another integration architecture initiative that has been taken. It's important that you not only assess your framework, but that you also assess your assets. Then you have a better feeling what's really happening in your organization. Your assets can be, before, for example, the Swagger files or some API architectures of certain projects. And in the organization, it's interesting to have a chat with your IT architects, with your analysts, and your developers. Based on the assessment that you have done, you need to position your organization in the maturity model. In the next slides, I will explain the maturity model that we have developed. And I want to give already the remark, it's possible that not all pillars are in line with the same stage. So it's possible that you have already gained enough evolution on your platform level, but maybe not on your design and realizations. So that's the maturity model that we have developed based on the experience and the insight that we have gained through a number of API programs. There are 6 stages. I will explain them directly. And on the row level, we have different aspects like description objectives, but also the 6 pillars that Matthias has explained. The purpose is that you look at which stage that you are in the maturity model. And the stage is important to know, okay, look, which kind of objectives do I want to achieve currently in the phase that my API initiative is. So therefore, we have defined the 6 stages. And for each stage, you want to achieve a certain objective. For example, the first of all, we have the organic stage, but the organic stage is really not the case where you have already started an API initiative. It's a stage where a limited set of developers or architects have started with architecting and developing REST APIs, for example, in a mobile app project, but there is no central steering, no governance. It's just an organically growing of the realized projects. And the initiating stage, there you start with your API initiative. The purpose of that stage is that you convince your future leads of the API initiatives. So you want to see, okay, what exactly do we want to achieve with APIs and API architecture? Do we have to introduce a new technology, yes or no? And mostly in that stage, you are executing a POC to prove your future leads what needs to be done. And the next step, the exploratory phase, you want to convince your future sponsors of the API initiative. And it's important that you have the focus on as well your business and IT sponsors. So there you will test your first version of your API framework in a number of pilot projects. And this way it's very tangible for your sponsors what exactly you can achieve with APIs or an API management platform and whatnot. After you have convinced them, you can really start with your API initiative and the larger organization. And that's what we call the emerging stage. And that stage is important that with the API framework that you have updated based on your pilot project, that you start with selecting a number of believer projects. It's always easier if you have to convince architects, project managers, or developers when they already believe in APIs or API management platforms. Because then you create your first success on a larger scale than just the pilot projects. In the systematic way stage, there you have you want to roll out your API management initiative over the complete organization. So here you will target all developers, all architects, and all business projects. And in the last stage, you want to have a running API initiative where you continuously improve yourself, and each time you add new improvements to your API framework and so on. And the next step, you define your target and define your program. So now it's important that you define your target stage that you want to achieve. So for example, if you based on your assessment, see that you are in the initiating phase and you want to go in the emerging phase, you have to define your actions to complete this. So it's important that you define your target states based on your SIS assessment. Also the time horizon. What do you want to achieve within 1, 2, 3, or 5 years? And also it's important to take into account the adoption rate of your organization, because sometimes organizations can easily adapt themselves. Otherwise, other organizations need more time. So based on the rows, you can define your actions. You plan your actions in the API program, and then you can start your API initiative. Important is that you have to respect your gate conditions. That you not skip a certain stage without meeting the gate conditions. I will not go through them in the detail because we don't have the time for that. But for example, if you go from exploratory to the emerging phase, it's important that you have successfully ended pilot projects, because then you can prove it to your believer projects that your platform is already installed and so on. Lastly, it's important to say that it is not a static maturity model. It's perfectly possible that you have a first version of your maturity model, and that you go to other versions based on the strategy that you have defined. For example, in the first version, you are targeting only internal APIs, and in the next version, you want to target also external APIs. Then you have to revise your maturity because you need other capabilities on your platform, you need other guidelines, and so on. So it's possible that during your lifetime, you have multiple iterations in your maturity model. What's also important is that you measure and steer. It's not important. You cannot just launch your initiative and wait and hope that it will end successfully. You constantly have to measure what you are doing. So therefore, we start mostly with KPI reporting. We define a number of metrics or KPIs. We report on them, and based on the insights we gain on this KPI reporting, we steer by. So based on your API strategy and your API ambitions, we can define your KPIs. And here we provide a number of examples, but it all depends on the strategy you want to achieve. For example, you can define your actual versus your target number of APIs. You can do that on domain or capability level. For example, you can also do it on the type of APIs. How many external APIs do we want to achieve, and so on. If your API initiative is in a mobile context, you can measure how much mobile applications are connected to your APIs and so on. And also what you can do is define a number of KPIs of your organization about the maturity that they have achieved, yes or no. For example, based on the trainings that have been followed, the coaching, and a competence model. That's, for example, a KPI reporting we have installed at the Scheerder group, but Dries will explain more about that. And then we are at our last step. It's about communication. Matthias, can you give more insights on that?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. We've come to the last step in this step-by-step guide, and it goes without saying that communication is key to make your API journey a success. And you have to act accordingly. Don't make this a hollow phrase, but make sure to implement this as well. You will have to be and keep in touch with your stakeholders. They were the ones you were turning to get input for the strategy. Now make sure their requirements and wishes are taken into account and convey to them you're following up on these and making them a reality. In order to do this, make communication plans so you have a guide for what to communicate when. Train your architects, your analysts, your developers, and testers. And once they have started with full enthusiasm, help them take their first steps by coaching them along the way. Start with communities for the different roles. For example, start a community of practice for API development, in which you will, together with them, discuss patterns, standards, guidelines, creating new ones and updating existing ones, maybe retiring standards that are outdated. Do it together because they will be the ones implementing it. Feedback loops, like in those communities of practice, but also with your stakeholders, with management, will be important to strengthen the initiative and get the base support you need. So that was the last step of the journey. So to give you a recap at the end of the session, in order to define your API journey, you will need to take the following steps. You will first need to define your strategy on which you can base your program. You will need to start your program, think it through, define it well, and get a flying start. Think about where you are positioned on the maturity model now and decide what your target is. Define your program accordingly. Measure your progress, and if you are not reaching goals, take the necessary actions. And do not forget to communicate with the organization. This concludes our step-by-step path for your API journey. If you want to know more, you can look at the resources we are listing in this slide. I want to thank you for joining us, and we are available for questions for a few minutes now.